Okay, let's bring in David Coletto now into the conversation, founder and CEO of Abacus Data. David, good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Great to see you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
So this change in cabinet really precipitated by Stephen Guilbeault's resignation over this MOU. And, that's where I want to begin our discussion, because you have this high-profile resignation. How risky is this MOU, based on the numbers that you've looked at, for both the Prime Minister and the Alberta Premier?
So, we're going to have a new survey out later this week that shows overwhelming support for the idea, for the MOU, for some of the details. But I think the risk is that, our last poll that we completed showed the Liberals ahead by 1 point over the Conservatives. And so there's not a lot of margin for error in, alienating some of your base. So I think there is some risk. If there are Liberals out there who maybe had voted NDP in the past, voted for Mark Carney in the spring because they wanted, his leadership, or they didn't want Pierre Poilievre, this might give them a real reason because of how much they care about climate change and how this just doesn't align with some of their values. So there's probably some risk, although I think it's going to take some time to see how the public digests this and how that argument's made. For the Premier in Alberta, for Danielle Smith, I think not a ton of risk. There's always a risk, I think, if you're playing too nice with Ottawa from an Alberta perspective. But look, this is an outcome that overwhelming numbers of Albertans support, as do most of those who would support the United Conservative Party in the province. So we'll see how this plays. But I think overall, she's going to take this as a win and now needs to do the work to get the pipeline moving. But, I think she's probably coming out of this in a real positive way, because no premier before in a long time has been able to say, look, we got Ottawa's attention and they're moving on something we care about.
Mm-hmm. And without a doubt, this memorandum of understanding, which is on energy writ large, but very focused in on pipeline, is part of Carney's larger strategy in terms of getting this country moving economically. And you have to add into that, of course, the federal budget. It was just adopted a couple of weeks ago. It still has to be implemented. Give us an idea of how happy or not Canadians are with this budget, because again, this will go towards Mark Carney's tick board as to it's a positive or negative.
Well, look, I think, Canadians, generally speaking, are fine with the budget. I don't think there's a lot who love it, but there's also not a lot who hate it, which I guess in these days is not a bad outcome. Our most recent survey we released over the weekend showed that the government's approval rating is up. Mark Carney's personal favorables have improved. And there's a higher number of people who feel optimistic about the direction of the country. All three of those indicators suggest that the period over the last number of weeks as the government headed towards that pivotal vote in the House has left them in a stronger position than they've been in. So I would say that the reaction to the budget hasn't certainly hurt the government and maybe has given it a little bit of lift. Ultimately, Michael, I think there's a group of Canadians who voted for Mark Carney because they felt he was the best able to deal with this moment, with Donald Trump, with the uncertainty that this moment has created. And while they probably didn't understand everything that was in the budget or why it was there, I think they still implicitly trust him. And that's his strength right now with a large number of Canadians who continue to see him as best able to deal with this moment and the anxiety that they're feeling because of it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm wondering if there's a regional aspect to this, though, David, because, in the last election, as per usual, Atlantic Canada voted for the Liberals, Ontario voted for the Liberals, a good number in British Columbia, but there's also the question of Quebec. So how is the budget selling in those regions where this government was able to secure victory?
Yeah, we're not seeing a ton of regional variation, as you'd expect, where Liberals are more popular, the budget's more popular. I think, this budget is very much a creation of the Prime Minister. And so, you don't see a lot of differentiation between how they feel about it and what it is meant to do and what they think the effect will be on them and how they feel about the Prime Minister. So in Quebec, in Atlantic Canada, in Ontario, and in British Columbia, where the Prime Minister did quite well in the election, you are seeing high levels of support for the budget, but also generally the economic direction that people feel the Prime Minister is taking the country and his government.
Mm-hmm. And as you said, he does still enjoy a fairly positive rating when it comes to his own personal popularity numbers, personal popularity numbers, they remain consistently ahead of Pierre Poilievre's. We're now 8 weeks away from a Conservative leadership review. How are Conservatives feeling about their leader right now? Because there is this statistical tie, according to your data, between Liberals and Conservatives in the polling numbers of the parties. But it seems that Pierre Poilievre is still a drag because he proves to still be unpopular amongst Canadians.
Yeah, I mean, Pierre Poilievre is by definition polarizing, right? And if you don't support the Conservatives, if you aren't identifying as a Conservative in the country, you really don't like him. But I think the paradox is he is still deeply popular among Conservative oriented Canadians. People who identify as Conservatives would vote Conservative. And so I look at the data. We released some numbers that, ask Canadians, if you had a vote in the convention, would you vote to keep or replace Mr. Poilievre? Among Conservative voters and Conservative supporters, more than 2/3 of decided Conservatives said they would vote to keep him in. So it doesn't appear that there's a lot of grumbling within the Conservative base to see Mr. Poilievre released. In fact, or replaced. In fact, I think there's a lot of affinity there. Past research I've done, Michael, shows 1 in 10 Conservative supporters today say they're there because of Pierre Poilievre. And so the question is, he's got to get through that leadership. It doesn't seem like there's anyone organizing against him. The party is likely, not happy with the outcome of the election. But I think they're left wondering who else could lead the party. And so I think he's probably safe. And I think our numbers suggest that that's the case.
Okay. Interesting numbers you came out with this past weekend, David. Thank you for this. Appreciate the time.
Great to see you, Michael. Take care.
You too.